The man intended to end his loneliness by throwing himself onto the train tracks, but unexpectedly a passenger beside him fell onto the tracks first. Faced with this sudden situation, the surrounding crowd showed no intention of helping, so the kind-hearted Ovi decisively jumped off the platform. But his aging body appeared so powerless in the face of life and death. Only then did the crowd stop being bystanders and work together to pull the man to safety. However, Ova remained standing in the middle of the tracks. No matter how the man beside him tried to dissuade him, he turned a deaf ear. It was not until he glimpsed a boy in the crowd that Ove snapped out of his trance, as he did not want his tragedy to become a traumatic memory for the child. So in the final second before the train arrived, he still made the choice to survive. Facing the accusations and curses from those around him, Ove paid them no mind. And this was not his first encounter with the Grim Reaper. For him, loneliness and despair had long followed him like a shadow. 6 months ago, Ova's wife passed away forever due to illness. Since then, his world had lost all its color. Only when he visited her grave with fresh flowers could he briefly feel a trace of warmth in the gentle breeze. Later, Ova began trying to use the busyness of work to fill the emptiness and longing left by the loss of his wife. But fate is always full of mockery. On this day, the young managers called in the 59-year-old Ove.
Ja, det är så att vi två har kommit fram till en möjlighet för dig.
Du är ju bara 59 år och du kanske vill göra någonting annat i livet.
Clearly, this was just their usual rhetoric. The truth was that the company ruthlessly fired Ove, who had toiled for 43 years on the grounds of his advanced age. This sudden change became the final straw that broke the camel's back, pushing him to the brink of despair.
Men skynda mig nu så kanske vi ses redan idag. Jag saknar dig.
Once Ova returned home, he began carefully grooming his appearance. Then he put on the blue suit that his wife loved most when she was alive. At this moment, Ova decided to put a period at the end of his lonely world in the most decisive way. But before doing so, he turned his head to glance at his wife's photograph. Even though time had passed, her beautiful smile still made his heart ripple. But that sweet memory soon solidified. Ova didn't want his wife to witness the scene of his death, so he hurriedly moved her picture to the sunlit window. Subsequently, he resolutely began his plan. He placed the noose around his neck, quietly awaiting the arrival of the Grim Reaper. But at this critical moment, uncharacteristically noisy sounds came from outside the house. It turned out that the new neighbors had driven their car right up to his front door, and the standing rule of the community was that vehicles were prohibited from entering. Ove intended to help the neighbor park the car, but the other party's driving skills were so worrying that they crashed directly into his mailbox. Pressed for time, he had to step in personally and demonstrate a standard reverse parking maneuver to the two young people. After finishing all this, Ove returned to his room intending to continue his unfinished plan. But just as he was about to reset the rope, the uninvited neighbor children outside the window interrupted him again. He hurriedly put away the rope to avoid scaring the children. By early the next morning, Ove continued with his plan. In order not to be disturbed by the outside world, he closed the blinds this time. Then he repeated yesterday's operations with the utmost speed. Ove thought that this time he could finally keep his appointment with his wife, but the urgent ringing of the doorbell still shattered all his thoughts. The repeated disturbances finally became unbearable for him. But when Ove angrily pushed open the door, he was met with two innocent, smiling faces. It turned out the neighbors had specially brought him Persian dishes from their hometown to thank Ove for his help yesterday. Furthermore, they had already seen the community notice and would not drive their car in here from now on. But before that, they wanted to borrow some of Ove's tools. Although Ove appeared extremely impatient, he thoughtfully gave them all the tools they needed. Just as he was about to turn and leave, the neighbor casually mentioned Ove's wife.
Tyst! Nu är det nog! Försvinn härifrån, allihop!
Ove's sudden roar frightened everyone, yet only he understood that hidden behind this irritability was his indelible longing for his wife. Every mention by others was no different from ripping open a scar on an old wound. Now he could only carefully sniff the lingering scent on the clothes his wife left behind. Perhaps this longing received a response as Ove actually saw his wife's figure in a trance. He chased after his wife into the living room. At that time, they had just moved into this community. His wife loved reading, and her collection of books filled the entire bookshelf. But in the blink of an eye, Ove returned to reality. He was about to begin his fourth attempt. This time, without a moment's hesitation, he kicked away the stool beneath his feet. It is said that people review their entire lives before they die. But Ove was particularly familiar with the ceiling of the church. At a young age, he lost his mother early, and in the days that followed, he and his father had only each other to depend on. But his father was always a man of few words. Ove could not even detect his longing for his mother. Until one day when Ove came home from school to look for his father working at the railway. But his father's smile gradually froze at this moment, and he hurriedly waved for Ove to get off the tracks. It was just too far away, and Ove could not hear clearly at all. Fortunately, Ove brushed past the Grim Reaper at the very last moment. His father rushed over and embraced his son in his arms. That was the first time Ove embraced his father, and from that warmth he felt fatherly love for the first time. Just like that Ove held on until his father got off work. Even at night, he refused to let go. Since then, the father and son completely opened their hearts to each other. Ove also realized at this time his father's deep love for cars. In his spare time, his father would always take Ove to tinker with that Saab car, and he passed on all his knowledge about cars to his son. Just like that, under his father's influence, Ove also began to believe that Saab was the best car in the world. The breeze in the countryside is always intoxicating. But the whispers of the night quietly stirred the longing buried deep within the hearts of both father and son. And Ove gradually realized that although his father was not good with words on the surface beneath that tough exterior, his love for him and his mother was never absent. Whenever the holidays arrived, Ove would come to the train carriage to help his father clean up. And on this day, he inadvertently found a wallet left behind by a passenger. Another coworker saw this and snatched it away immediately. But Ove did not hesitate much and snatched the wallet back again. Ove thought he would be subjected to a vicious beating, but his father's sudden appearance stopped the coworker's atrocity, and he signaled for Ove to handle the wallet himself. Unexpectedly, after getting off work, Ove turned the wallet over to the station's lost and found. His father highly praised his kindness. And at this moment, he also told Ove that this kind of moral character often requires the backing of some strength. Under his father's care and companionship, Ove gradually grew up. In order not to let down his father's hardships along the way, he never dared to slack off in his studies. On the day of his graduation, he found his father with his report card in hand, and after taking the report card, joy quickly rippled across his father's cheeks. Ove's excellent grades brought great comfort to his father, and he showed off his son to his co-workers with immense pride. Ove also made up his mind at this moment to use his own hands to lead his father toward a bright future. But the next second, fate once again revealed its cruel side. Since then, Ove became a helpless orphan with no one to rely on. But the heavy pressure of reality never changed his honest character. After his father's funeral ended, he immediately found the station director and returned the wages his father had been advanced.
Pengarna. Rätt ska vara rätt.
Just like that, Ove took over his father's job. But here he once again encountered the co-worker who had snatched his wallet when he was a child. The crowd said nothing more and simply shoved Ove aside. Then that co-worker forcibly took the watch his father had left for Ove and did not even forget to taunt him before leaving. Facing such an ugly countenance from his co-worker, Ove did not back down in the slightest. This was exactly the strength behind honesty that his father had taught him. But Ove's life was destined not to be a smooth path. Even that white cottage filled with memories of his parents was soon targeted by developers. Claiming the house was too dilapidated, the other party issued a mandatory demolition notice to Ove. But Ove was unwilling to lose this warm harbor, so he took out all his remaining savings to carry out a comprehensive renovation of the house. When the developers arrived again, what greeted their eyes was a brand new house. They naturally lost their grounds for mandatory demolition. However, just at this moment, Ove inexplicably felt a burst of sharp pain. It turned out that the rope had snapped, causing him to fall heavily to the ground. This attempt to end his own life also ended in failure. Subsequently, he angrily sought out the shop owner.
Universalrep, sa du? Va? Håller för allt.
Vad använder du till?
Facing the owner's confusion, Ove had no choice but to leave resentfully. The strangulation marks on his neck seemed to be silently interpreting the weight of life. Afterwards, Ove once again came to his wife's grave. Although he was always cold as ice in front of outsiders here, he had endless things to say. He recounted his failed experience to his wife and did not even forget to complain about that family of new neighbors. Then he spread a newspaper on the ground, attempting to seek a trace of his wife's silhouette in the afternoon sun. Even though his life was approaching its end, Ove still held fast to his stubborn principles. Every morning he would patrol within the community. Ove could not tolerate the act of littering cigarette butts, nor did he wish to see bicycles parked haphazardly. The community garages had to be locked one by one. Even the garbage had to be sorted and stored according to regulations. Outside vehicles could not drive into the community at will. Even pets had to abide by these rules. Even though Ove was long past being the community manager, he still continued this responsible yet paranoid attitude. Once anyone was caught by Ove violating the rules, they would be met with a scolding right to their face. Therefore, the people in the community did not really care for this strange old man. On this day, he found the lady next door, asking for the return of the water hose he had lent out. He also took this opportunity to repair their long broken radiator for them, and the male owner of this family, Rune, was actually Ove's best brother when they were young. At that time, the community was unmanaged and always in a state of chaos. Whenever this happened, Rune would step forward. Ove would naturally follow close behind. Over time, the two became the best of friends and both were elected as chairman of the committee. And those so-called community regulations were exactly what the two of them had established together. However, Ove discovered by chance that the car Rune drove was actually a Volvo. This had always been in a competitive relationship with the Saab cars he cherished. In the days that followed, the two began an open and secret struggle, everywhere showing off that their own car was the best in the world. As the relationship between the two became increasingly acrimonious, Rune actually kicked Ove directly out of the committee. But as time went by, this feud surprisingly lasted for decades. Later, Ove wanted to repair their relationship and visited Rune with a bottle of fine wine. But he was surprised to discover that Rune had actually purchased a foreign luxury car, so seeing this, Ove turned around and left. There was no longer any possibility of reconciliation between the two. On the surface, their competition was about cars, but in truth, their conflict came from differences in personality. Ove was stubborn and rigid, while Rune liked to constantly try fresh new things. But after many years when the two met again, Rune was already paralyzed by illness. Ove did not hide anything either and told him about his suicide plan. But strangely, as Ove intended to leave, Rune actually grabbed the hose with his hand, attempting to stop Ove's next move. But Ove had long since made his decision, so how could he give up easily? This time he came inside the garage. After stroking his beloved Saab for the last time, Ove fitted the hose onto the car's exhaust pipe, and the other end of the hose was secured inside the car. Ove resolutely started the engine. But as the smoke filled the air, he remembered that fire. The neighbor's house nearby actually burst into raging flames in the middle of the night. And Ove soon heard the cries for help coming from inside the house. Without a moment of hesitation, he rushed into the fire and saved the neighbor's family 1 second before the house collapsed. But before he could rest for a moment, he turned his head to find that his own home had also caught fire. He hurriedly rushed forward but was stopped by the firefighters. And just at this time, the developers also rushed over. Clearly, this was not an accidental incident, and that once warm house had turned into dilapidated rubble. But miraculously, his father's watch was completely undamaged. Thereafter, the lonely and helpless Ove could only spend the long nights inside the train carriages. But life always offers a ray of light amidst despair. When Ove woke up again, what caught his eye was a pair of red high heels. Clearly, the train had already started moving at this point. Just then, the conductor came to check the tickets. And where would the penniless Ove have a ticket? But this girl, who he had never met before, actually paid the fare for him directly. Ove was somewhat flattered, as this was a rare trace of warmth he had felt in many years. During their conversation, Ove learned that the girl's name was Sonja and she was undergoing teacher training. She told Ove about her favorite books. But Ove was a bit restless, not knowing how to strike up a conversation with her. So much so that when he hurriedly got off the train, he actually forgot his backpack. Fortunately, Sonja kindly reminded him, and only then did he realize his negligence. They just gazed at each other like that through the window. The girl's shy face had already explained everything. But the train eventually had to move forward, and their first meeting came to a close with the sound of the train whistle. Only the warm breeze blowing gently on the way back made Ove understand what it meant to fall in love at first sight. From then on, he would take that train every day. But this went on for several weeks, and he never caught a glimpse of the girl. However, just as Ove was about to give up, Sonja's clear eyes broke into his world again, like scattered light illuminating his gloomy world. In order to leave a good impression on Sonja, Ove lied, claiming that he was in the military.
Tänkte att du ska få tillbaka dina pengar.
Är det inte trevligare om du bjuder mig på middag?
Jag har inte riktigt någonstans laga middagen på.
Jag menar på restaurang.
The corners of their mouths turned up slightly, carrying a hint of tenderness and a tacit understanding. When the night grew thick, Ove prepared fresh flowers and waited for Sonja's arrival. The warm candlelight carried a bit of Sonja's softness. Both were a bit reserved on their first date, but eventually it was Ove who broke the silence. Yet he started talking about the mechanics of cars. Sonja listened with gusto, but she soon discovered that Ove had only served himself some free porridge.
Du har nästan inte ätit någonting.
Nej, jag åt hemma.
Varför åt du hemma?
Så att du skulle kunna beställa vad du ville. Jag ljuger för dig. Jag ligger inte i lumpen. Jag ställer tåg. Och mitt hus har brunnit ner. Och nu ska jag gå.
Ove knew deep down that his destitution made him unworthy of Sonja, but it was precisely his sincerity that moved the girl's heart. Since then, they quickly fell in love. With Sonja's encouragement, Ove successfully qualified as an engineer and finally had the confidence to propose to the girl of his dreams.
Om du skulle vilja att vi...
Kolla lugnt och tydligt.
Vill du gifta dig med mig?
Happiness is always fleeting. Even though Ove was hiding in the garage, he was still woken up by the knocking on the door outside. It turned out to be that new neighbor Parvane coming to ask for help, because her husband had fallen off a ladder. But she did not know how to drive. Parvane had to request that Ove drive them to the hospital. Even though Ove complained that Parvane was 30 years old and still could not drive, he reluctantly agreed. But after everything was sorted out, Parvane hoped Ove would help look after the two children. He appeared extremely unwilling on the surface, but after Parvane left, he actually began telling fairy tales to the children, vividly. The children soon realized that this stubborn old man was not as frightening as he seemed. Even under Ove's supervision, the two children cleaned the kitchen at home until it was spotless. And it was precisely this interaction with the children that caused Ove's heart to waver slightly. They hugged each other when parting, but Ove still hurriedly bade them farewell. Subsequently, he impatiently rushed to the station. He did not want all this to interrupt his plan. Ove chose to throw himself onto the train tracks for his sixth attempt to end his life. But just as he mustered the courage intending to end it all, a passenger beside him suddenly fainted at this moment. Clearly, the people around were long accustomed to all this, but the kind-hearted Ove still resolutely jumped off the platform. But after the man was successfully rescued, Ove showed no intention of coming up. Yet in a trance, he saw his childhood self. It seemed to be the same scene again, and Ove remembered how he had lost his father. In the end, he still climbed up before the train arrived at the station. The dark clouds of the past always loomed over Ove. After returning to the community, Parvane called out to him. It turned out their daughter had drawn a picture for Ove. And in that picture, Ove was a colorful and bright existence. Just at this moment, the miserable scream of a kitten came from the side. This kitten used to be frequently stoned by others, and now it was covered in wounds again. But during the interval when Ove went upstairs to get a blanket for the kitten, Parvane had actually stepped into his kitchen. Parvane was very puzzled by the lower countertops before her eyes, but Ove did not say much. Seeing that Parvane's whole family was allergic to cats, Ove had no choice but to take the kitten in. Although he did not like small animals, he still decided to postpone his plan. Ove promised his wife that once the kitten found its next owner, he would come to find her. Afterwards, Ove actually took the initiative to take Parvane for driving practice, which was unprecedented. The reason he did this was not only out of worry that the previous accident would happen again, but also in hopes of giving others some help before he left. Although Ove gave up the thought of moving forward, his inner sense of responsibility and kindness still guided his every step. But just when Ove came to find Parvane for driving practice for the second time, he encountered a difficult reporter named Lena. It turned out Lena had witnessed Ove's rescue process and she hoped to edit a news story for Ove. But Ove did not like so-called interviews, nor did he want the truth of his suicide to be detected by others. In a fit of anger, he actually locked Lena directly inside the garage. Fortunately, Parvane rushed over, and after hearing the sounds coming from the garage, she rescued Lena. Ove's childish behavior made Parvane laugh heartily, as she did not expect Ove to have such an immature side. Taking the opportunity, she advised Ove to put away his wife's belongings. Ove did not want to forget his wife, which was exactly the reason he did not wish for others to mention her. But just at this moment, an outsider actually intruded into the community. Ove forced the other party to stop, according to custom. But this arrogant man had long held an opinion against Ove. Facing Ove's eviction, Fitzgjorton became even more radical, and he had also looked up various information about Ove on the internet.
Jag har läst alla dina tokiga inlägg, dina brev till myndigheter. Jag vet allt om din fru och hennes olycka och du skyller på allt och alla för den. Men vet du, tänk om det bara var att du inte räckte till.
And these words from Fitzgjorton successfully ignited Ove's fury. Sonja was originally a sad place Ove did not want to touch, so he angrily rushed into the room feeling that the whole world was his enemy. And after a burst of venting, Ove finally could not hold it back and began to cry hysterically. He slowly looked at the ceiling, and the face of his former lover gradually became clear. But in the blink of an eye, it vanished again. Looking at the kitten in the bedroom, Ove still decided to continue his suicide plan. In order to avoid disturbing the neighbors and the kitten, he first turned the radio up to the maximum volume. Then he covered the entire living room with plastic, but just as he made up his mind to pull the trigger, the doorbell rang again from outside. Ove's seventh suicide attempt also ended in failure. He opened the door furiously, only to find that the visitor was Sonja's student. It turned out that the two were homeless at this time and hoped to stay at Ove's house for one night. He was originally extremely unwilling, but they mentioned Sonja. Ove did not want to destroy the good impression his wife had left on the students, so he reluctantly agreed. The next morning, Ove was awakened by noise in the kitchen. Stepping forward, he discovered that it was the boy preparing breakfast for Ove. And since his wife passed away, Ove no longer had the habit of eating breakfast regularly. Furthermore, Ove's daily patrol was no longer a solitary one. But at that moment, Jimmy told Ove that Fitzgjorton had been trying for years to put Rune into a nursing home so he could profit from it. And Rune's wife had been silently enduring all this, unwilling to trouble Ove, fighting the lawsuit against the other party alone for many years. At this moment, Ove finally woke up completely. He had always been calling others idiots, but now he realized that he was the truly stupid one. Because of his stubbornness and indifference, he had actually left his good brother to endure all this alone. When he stood before his wife's grave again, he whispered his repentance. He also decided to let go of the thought of suicide and live out the life his wife hoped for. After returning home, Ove found Rune's wife asked for all the documents and then began an endless appeal process. But these efforts did not cause any ripples. Just when Ove was about to give up in frustration, Parvane stepped forward.
Att du har haft det för jävligt, alla är idioter. Så ger du bara upp. Bara för att du tror att du är typ den enda människan på den här planeten som kan klara sig helt utan hjälp. Men vet du vad, Ove? Ingen klarar sig själv. Ingen.
After calming all his thoughts, Ove finally opened his heart and recounted the story between him and Sonja in detail. It turned out that shortly after they were married, Sonja became pregnant with Ove's child. But before the child was born, Sonja still hoped to take a trip with Ove. They did not drive on their own, but chose a travel group that was full of life and color. They would have open-air dinners by the romantic pool and sleep until they woke up naturally in the cozy hotel. Ove thought they would always be happy. Just on the way back, Sonja happily told Ove that the baby was kicking her belly. Happiness surged into his heart like a tide, almost making Ove's tears burst the dam. So he hurriedly made an excuse to go to the restroom, and before entering the door, he took a look at his wife's sweet smile. But just as he was wiping away the tears of emotion, the accident happened. And Ove, who was in the restroom, only suffered superficial injuries. But Sonja was not so lucky. This accident caused Ove to lose their child, and the doctor also told him that Sonja was very likely to become a vegetable. But fortunately, a miracle still happened. Sonja woke up from her coma, but completely lost her mobility, and could only spend her days in a wheelchair from then on. But Ove, who regained his true love, did not collapse. Instead, he remodeled every detail of the house into the most suitable form for his wife. Under Ove's encouragement, his wife successfully passed the teacher training. But no school was willing to accept a disabled teacher. So Ove reported to the relevant departments hoping to get some help. But in the end, it all fell on deaf ears. Just when Ove was disheartened, one sentence from Sonja gave him immense courage.
Antingen dör vi, eller så lever vi.
Facing the many hardships of life, we often just lack that inch of hysterical courage. At this moment, Ove also knew more clearly that he must help his wife fulfill her dream of being a teacher. So he came to the school in the rainy night and built a handicap ramp with his own hands. This action earned the recognition of everyone. Sonja was also successfully hired by the school. Even though Sonja could not have her own children, the path of education allowed her love to continue in another way. It is just that illness still took away that warmth. Fortunately, Ove was not alone at this time. When Vitskjorten visited again, Lena had been waiting for a long time, and she had collected all the evidence of his embezzlement in recent years. So under everyone's gaze, Vitskjorten had to leave here. After many years, Ove finally reconciled with Rune. The two looked at each other and smiled, as if all the good things were emerging one by one. Later, Parvana's child was born smoothly. Ove found the crib that was originally prepared for his own child. But time always passes in a hurry. The winter of this year was particularly cold, but today, Ove surprisingly did not go out on his patrol. Parvane vaguely seemed to sense something, but when they rushed into the room, they found that Ove had already passed away. But fortunately, this time it was not suicide but a natural death in the true sense. Ove left a suicide note beside him. At the last moment, he did not forget to entrust the community rules and hoped that his funeral would be as simple as his parents'. But to everyone's surprise, on the day of the funeral, the church was full. This outwardly stubborn old man actually wrote a warm chapter with his life. And Ove firmly believed that his life had long lost its meaning. He was stubborn, lonely, and even wanted to leave this world. But life always gives us warmth in the most unexpected places. When the neighbors' care, the children's laughter, and the company of friends seeped into his world, bit by bit. He discovered that the true weight of life is not loneliness and pain, but those who are willing to walk into your life and willing to understand you. A man named Ove teaches us that the power of love and companionship can break the hardest shell and heal the deepest pain. Even if life is full of regrets, as long as someone is willing to reach out and give understanding and warmth, every soul can feel the beauty and hope of life again. Ove's story makes us understand that the meaning of life is never to endure alone, but to find warmth and strength in mutual care, learn to forgive, and also learn to be loved.